Welcome to Stoked with Megan McPhail, the podcast that helps you get super effing jazzed about your work, life, and bank account. I'm your host, Megan McPhail, a former burnt-out emergency veterinarian that quit my hard-earned career to become a seven-figure business coach, entrepreneur, and elopement photographer. Now I'm living a life I absolutely love, full of travel, adventure, and financial abundance, and I am hell-bent on inspiring others to do the same. Are you ready to say goodbye to the 9-to-5 grind and start going after some big, bold dreams? Then let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, it's your host, Megan McPhail.
And your co-host, Todd.
And today's episode is a really important one for all the entrepreneurs and wannabe entrepreneurs. It's all about the wisdom of failure and kind of reframing failure so that it doesn't hold us back. Because truly, failure is a part of success. It's a huge part of success. I want you to start thinking of failure as important feedback about your business journey. I think a lot of people create these expectations for themselves. They create a goal that maybe they don't hit, or they have a timeline and maybe they don't do things in that timeline. And they take that as a failure in their business, or maybe they launch something and no one buys it, or they start some ads and they're not performing well, or they create an offer or have a service and no one's buying it. And it's this idea that they've failed and that they can't be a good business owner when it's just part of the process. I've certainly failed, quote unquote, because I really don't think failures even exists really. But I failed, quote unquote. I have launched things that didn't do well. I have run ads to the tune of thousands and thousands of dollars that didn't help my business. I have purchased courses and presets and all kinds of stuff that I ended up not using, which I feel like could be kind of a failure. But really, I want everyone to stop seeing failure through such a negative lens. And I think this is really all rooted in the way we're raised in the school that we go to, because this is really something that you have to unlearn, this idea of failure, this idea that you have to get straight A's and be perfect all the time to be successful is just not true. But that was true in school. The better grades you got, the more perfect you were, the better you were at test taking and writing and all that stuff. Like, that meant you succeeded, but that's just not how business goes. Would you say that your upbringing was kind of priming you to be afraid of failure?
Yeah, with, like you said, school, but then like everything we either see like on social media or in the news, or like when you, read books on folks, you typically hear about the wins. Rarely do you hear about the failures or like the missed attempts or all of the bad things that happen before a good thing may happen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that I am primed, and I think the vast majority of us across the board are primed, and we're expected to win and have successes. Yeah, you learn more from your failures than your successes sometimes.
Well, yeah, and that's the whole premise of this podcast, is that you'll learn a lot from these quote unquote failures. And the problem really is that people view it from a negative angle, from a negative lens. They see it as incompetence or inadequacy, or even a sign from the universe that they shouldn't be doing this, when in reality, it's just a part of the journey. And I think what people really don't understand is that business is all about, you have an offer or you have a service, and that's like 10% of business. The other 90% is really marketing. And marketing is a learned skill, just like whatever skill or offer you are providing to people, that you're selling to people, was a learned skill. So being able to market yourself can be challenging for people. And there can be a lot of setbacks and quote unquote failures when you're marketing yourself and nobody's buying, or they're not buying fast enough or big enough or on the timeline for you to be able to pay your mortgage that month or whatever it is. But you have to see the numbers in that. You have to collect the data. You have to get the feedback. You can use all of that to understand why you're not performing at the level that you want to in your business and fix it. That's really the big transition I want people to have, is that it doesn't mean you're inadequate or that you deserve any negative self-talk that you're giving yourself. It's an opportunity to grow and learn and change things up.
So as you were kind of explaining that, I was kind of thinking how optimistic we are, I think, as entrepreneurs of, like, what's our next thing? What's the next big thing? And rarely do we think of like the bad things that may happen. Like, it's a pessimistic view of like, oh, I'm going to launch this, but it could fail. It could flop, right? I think it's probably just we don't go through those steps of figuring out what is like the worst that could happen, or like what's a 50% win. And so like we prime ourselves to like expect the best, because obviously that's what we want and that's what we're striving for.
Well, when you launched High Alpine Films, you basically thought people were going to come out of the woodwork to get you to do video for them, right?
Oh yeah, I had such positive expectations that, yeah, I was going to book out my schedule. I was going to be able to charge a lot. And it was a slow grind to build. And it was very much not what I was expecting. Like, it didn't even cross my mind that people wouldn't want to hire me right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people kind of expect, is that they're going to put their photography on Instagram and people are going to come running. Or they're going to put elopement photographer in their bio with a little airplane, and all of a sudden somebody's going to fly them to Greece for this epic elopement. Or somebody's going to create a coaching program or an online course and people are just going to eat it up. And that's just not how it works.
Yeah, and
it's just not how it works. And that is not a sign for you to stop. It's a sign that you need to learn marketing, essentially, and you need to collect data and numbers, and you can use that to improve your success later on, is really how it works.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is, again, we hear these overnight successes, even though like for the vast majority of people that are like doing amazingly well that you're reading about in the news, it was a slow grind. Yeah, they may have just popped up into your like knowledge, but they were been grinding. Like, I hear about musicians and like the classic like Mark Zuckerberg or Hormozy. Those guys put in the work for years and years, and now they're seeing like this massive success. Yeah. So it is a slow grind, and you got to be patient.
Yeah, even with this podcast, my idea is that maybe we'll monetize it years from now. Like, it's a slow burn. And just to see, like, we're tracking our progress through numbers and downloads and total downloads and how it's improving over time. And we're seeing like a trajectory that is in the positive. But yeah, if my idea was like, oh my God, 20 episodes in, and we don't have thousands of downloads per episode and people aren't wanting to like sponsor us and stuff like that, I'd feel like we were failing. So it's part of how you set up your expectations and your goals. And it's weird because it's like this fine line, especially with my coaching students. Like, I want them to set big, scary goals, Like, I want even the people who I'm coaching to be coaches. Like, I want you to think like a ton of people are going to join your group coaching program and act accordingly. But then when a ton of people don't join your group coaching program, or if you don't book tens of thousands of dollars worth of elopements the second you hit play on your Google ads, that doesn't mean anything. We have to kind of take our ego out of it and take our hard work out of it, or our expectations out of it, and kind of like with a neutral mindset, be like, okay, this didn't work, but why? And that's some valuable freaking information right there. Why it's not working. Where is the disconnect? That's where I think I kind of have a little bit of my zone of genius, because I'm used to diagnostics from being an emergency veterinarian. I'm used to problem solving and figuring out where the disconnect is, or how do I diagnose this problem. I'm used to kind of going through that in a stepwise process, the way I used to do when like a dog came in and was sick and I didn't know why. That's how you can kind of look at your failures as well. Like, man, I'm going to get so much information from why this didn't work out so that I can change it for the next time. And this idea that you're going to put something out into the world and people are just going to come banging on your door to buy from you is not how it works. There might be a few lucky people where that happens and they're like, oh my God, the demand is so high and I don't have the supply. And it's like, that happens rarely. But that's probably what gets reported on because it's so rare. And like, we hear that one story and we want that to be us. Like, if I just post a viral reel, then all of a sudden I'll be booked up. And it's like, no, that's not real life. When things don't measure up to our expectations or our goals, that doesn't mean we can't get to that. That just means maybe the timeline has been extended out a bit while we troubleshoot and diagnose the problem. So if you ever do experience a failure or a setback or something that doesn't happen the way you want it to happen, it's really important time to maybe sit in those feelings for like 12 to 24 hours, because we have big feelings. All of us entrepreneurs, a lot of our work is very much like a labor of love. And a lot of us are putting ourselves out there and are facing the potential for rejection kind of based on our personalities and our art and our coaching capabilities and stuff. So like rejection or not hitting our goals can feel really awful. So sitting in that is okay. Like I know I've had 24-hour stints where I have basically given myself permission and told you, I'm just going to complain about whatever comes to my mind, no matter how outlandish it is.
Which is a good exercise.
Yeah, it is a good exercise.
But putting a time limit is super important, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't carry on or
Yeah. The time limit is important, because then I'd be like, I'm just going to give myself a day to complain about anything, no matter how ridiculous it is to Todd. Just purge it, get rid of it. And then I'm going to get rid of my emotions about it, get rid of my ego about it, and reflect on it and see, why did this happen? What is the lesson here? Because there's always a lesson, whether it's just the numbers weren't big enough, like the audience wasn't big enough, the marketing message didn't hit. There's always a lesson to why you didn't hit a goal that you wanted to. And what can you change either going forward or for the next launch, or like, what can you change in your ads? There's always something that you could change. And like knowing what people don't want is just as powerful as what people do want, as far as your buyers and your clients and stuff like that, your couples, all of that.
Well, and as you're doing kind of that decompressing or like that deep dive afterwards, then you'll also learn of the things that did work, which is also super valuable, right? Like sometimes maybe you go to your next launch and like maybe if you didn't do that exercise, maybe it's kind of like what was successful or like what needs to be replicated. So taking the stock, what went well and what went poorly, I think it's just as important.
Yeah. And sometimes it literally is just the numbers and the audience isn't big enough. Like if your website traffic is like 50 people, you're not going to be booking a ton of elopements. Or if your ad spend is $20 a day and your email list is 100 people, you're not going to be booking a bunch of coaching or selling a bunch of courses. A lot of times everything might be going right, except the scale at which you're doing it and understanding conversion rates and stuff like that. So kind of taking the emotion and the ego out of it, and instead of thinking that it's personal and realizing a lot of it has to do with the numbers and understanding what those numbers are, is an amazing way to learn from an objective standpoint. I teach a lot of people, and I've had to teach myself over the years, is that there's so much feedback in the numbers that, that's why failure just doesn't exist to me, because it truly is just feedback. And you can look at all kinds of different metrics and see like, oh yeah, this actually did convert well. I just don't have enough people. Or, oh yeah, like I have a lot of people, but it didn't convert well because of the messaging. Like there's always a way to troubleshoot what's going on in your business and to improve it over time. And I think really taking some of these expectations and outcomes out of it, or at least the timeline, and maybe being like, okay, like maybe I'm not going to make this money back in time for my mortgage payment or whatever random thing I set for myself, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to still hit these goals. So really, some of the best things that you could do to be successful is changing your mindset about these failures, realizing they're just a part of the process, even renaming it just as feedback instead of a failure, and seeing how you can change things so that you can improve it in the future. I mean, that's huge. That's what makes people successful, because the only thing that keeps you from achieving the craziest amount of success that you want is you quitting. And why do people quit? Because they start with all this negative self-talk about their quote unquote failures. And instead of using them to learn from and propel them forward, they might just give up altogether. And I've come across quite a few people lately who I've seen get really down on themselves for not succeeding the first time they do something. One of them was somebody who didn't work with me, but launched a course and nobody bought it. And just from looking at some of her stuff briefly, I saw places that she could improve her sales page, probably her email messaging, but she said to me, it seems like everyone else can do this except me. First, I told her that's not true. Like my first launch, when I first started coaching elopement photographers, I got one person to sign up. And that could have been seen as like a big failure and like, oh, I should just quit. But really, it was just because my email list was small. And I actually converted pretty much like the way I should have converted. And I also took that as an opportunity to be like, maybe DIYing this all by myself was not the way to go. And maybe I need a copywriter to write my sales page. And maybe I need somebody to help me with emails because my message to these people isn't coming across. And I also need to figure out how to freaking grow my email list because there's only like 60 people on here. So I figured out a lot of things from that launch. And that's why I'm successful today, because every launch, like you kind of don't know how it's going to go. And it's always a learning opportunity. So this woman launched one time, got 0 signups, and she took that as a sign that everyone else could do it except for her, when really that's not it at all. Launch 12 more times and then tell me what you've learned. Like launching is a learned skill. Marketing is a learned skill. Running ads is a learned skill. These are all things that nobody ever is going to be good at their first time around. Maybe a select few, a very small percentage, will luck out in some way for whatever reason. But the vast majority of entrepreneurs are not going to luck out, and they're going to have to do this slow grind over time. They are going to have to analyze things to figure out why things worked and why things didn't work. And I think some of the folks where things work right off the bat and they don't know why, they're the ones that really struggle in times where things are changing, algorithms change, and they relied on Instagram forever, so now they don't know how to market themselves. You've got to be able to evaluate your business, be able to troubleshoot it and problem solve. And if you don't have those skills from like falling on your face a few times and getting back up and doing it over again, it's going to be hard for you at some point in your business. Business is just not all easygoing forever.
Yeah. So I think from being a baby entrepreneur, I know that building a successful business is going to be like an iterative process. But again, like we all start these endeavors with big eyes and like wanting and expecting the most. So just using the language that you use, which was to like take your ego out of it, it's hard. I want that success and many others want it too. Like we want it now. So yeah, taking the ego out of it is definitely a learned skill to get better.
Yeah. And I think where a lot of people get stuck is that they might get a rejection or they might fail at a launch. And then that whole feedback loop happens where they're like, I'm not good enough. I can't do this, So then if they do continue trying, they may not try enough. Or they use that as an excuse for why they shouldn't pursue something, or they lower their prices or something like that. So they get really stuck in these feedback loops of dealing with price hagglers, or maybe they don't launch their course again, or they spend less on ads because they weren't working very much, where sometimes really what we need to do is take more action, which that's scary if you've quote unquote failed before. But this idea, that you've even failed to begin with is just false, because you're out here trying new things that probably everyone in your family thinks you're crazy about, and you're putting yourself out there. These are all brave, courageous things, and you're in a learning phase, and you have to give yourself grace. And I'm still in a learning phase. I learn things all the time about launching and ads and offers and services and elopement photography. And I'm constantly learning. So this idea that you can come out the gate being perfect, or that you're never going to stumble and fall on your face, or that any setback is some kind of sign that you shouldn't be doing this or that you can't do it, just none of it is true. So really being able to be resilient in the face of all of this which is also a huge part of being an entrepreneur that we did a whole podcast on, and being able to overcome and maintain positivity and learn how to navigate it is huge for your success and what you absolutely have to possess to be successful. Because if you get stuck talking down to yourself because somebody didn't book you or something didn't go the way you wanted to or on the timeline that you want to, I almost want to do a podcast just on timelines because people get so stuck on, but I wanted this to happen by now. And like, business doesn't care about when your bills are due. It cares about when you have all the right puzzle pieces in place to make it work. And I think you were going to ask me what I would tell somebody who has quote unquote failed. And there's so many different businesses that I help people with, and they're all very, very different. But again, take that 24 hours to complain to anybody who is willing to listen and validate your opinions and thoughts and feelings and stuff like that. But then look at the numbers. Think, what numbers are there in your business? Is there website visitors? Is there inquiries? Is there bookings, consult calls? Is there ad spend, email list numbers? How many people came to your live event? How many people applied? Start tracking those numbers. There's industry standards for everything. We've been collecting data on elopement photographers for like years now. So I don't know if there's anything published for them, but we have it. And you don't even have to know the industry standards. You just have to figure out, okay, how can I improve this number over time? Will this help me? And really, that can take a lot of the ego and the hurt that we feel and the emotion out of it, because then it makes it something tangible and objective. And a lot of business isn't. Like, there's a lot of nuance in it, right? Especially with marketing and the messaging we have for people. But the numbers also don't lie. And the numbers where a lot of the problem solving and troubleshooting of businesses are. And sometimes it's because the numbers are too small. And that's the only reason. It's not because you suck. And it's not because you're a giant failure. It's because nobody knows you exist. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful for some people facing this idea of failure. And it's really just part of being an entrepreneur. You're going to learn a lot from whatever failures you think you have. And the more resilient you become in the face of those setbacks, the better off you're going to be. And you're going to be successful if you keep going, as long as you don't quit. And it might be years and years from now when you really see the true success you want. I am still going after even bigger amounts of success than I have, way bigger. And yeah, maybe I'll be 50 by the time that happens. Who knows, because sometimes it is a slow roll, but keep going. Thanks so much for listening to our podcast. And can I ask you a big, big favor? If you love this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We only have 3 so far. And I know so many of you love this podcast. And the more reviews we have, the more Apple is likely to show it to other people. So I'm really going to start asking people to leave us reviews. And maybe we'll even start doing some giveaways or something.
We should do a giveaway.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. So we'll put that together. But yeah, we want more people to find this podcast. We want it to become popular. I'd love to monetize it at some point. But more than that, I want to change lives. I want to help people. So the more reviews we have, the better. So please, please, please go to Apple Podcasts. Make sure you're downloading the podcast and make sure you leave a review for us. We would really, really appreciate it. We're going to start doing some giveaways for people who leave reviews. So thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Stoked with Megan McPhail. If you enjoyed the show and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. If you're looking for more inspiring content, check us out on Instagram at Stoked with Megan McPhail. And to learn more about my business coaching and how I can personally help you quit your 9-to-5, visit my website at meganmcphail.com. I hope this leaves you feeling stoked. See you next week.